the way we train them to act can actually affect their heart for good. Yeah. And that's what the scriptures talk about. And I mean, I think we should just quickly go through some of these before we get to some practical, how do you handle it? Because I think the Bible helps us to understand this is one of the ways we can help to shape our children and train them towards virtue.
Okay, Erin, I'm going to take, I think, a long shot here. And I'm just wondering, for you folks who are listening, you parents, grandparents, whoever's listening, have you ever experienced like a kid, your kid, talking back to you or rolling their eyes or giving a dirty look or being rude or interrupting or complaining or whining? I mean, I know it's a long shot. I'm not guessing a lot of parents have experienced that. Have you guys ever experienced that? Because our kids have been pretty perfect when it comes to their attitude, and we've never experienced that. So we're not sure what that's like.
We're 5 for 5. We've never.
Yeah, and so we just wanted to get feedback from those of you who have experienced that from your sinful little children. Obviously, I'm being facetious. Everyone who's listening, everyone who's a parent, everyone who's trying to raise kids has experienced, I guess we can summarize all that with attitude. You know, we get attitudes. Can we say crappy? We get bad attitudes.
Might have to bleep that.
That's like the Christian bleep. Actually, no, we should have him bleep it. Just so it sounds like I actually cursed. Because, I mean, that's how many of us want to describe it, isn't it? I mean, we get a lot of from our kids. And the question is, what do we do with that? I mean, we get a lot of attitude from our kids. And the question is, what do we do with that? Do we just kind of take it? Is that part of raising kids? And they'll just grow out of it?
Maybe add to the discussion. I'd like to. What do we do when our husbands are also in that group of people with bad attitudes? Well,
let me pause, and I just want to recognize you for something, Erin. I just want to recognize you for actually giving a little sarcasm back.
I am sarcastic back.
I don't think people pick that up on the podcast. I think there's probably a lot of wives out there who listen and are like, "Oh, Erin, why do you take this?" And Brett's so sarcastic. But yeah, let's be honest. Off camera, you are very sarcastic. It just doesn't show up on camera as much. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And because sarcasm is one of the Kunkel family love languages, I feel loved right now. So keep it up, honey. Keep it up. I appreciate that.
Well, in seriousness, I mean, you said, to bring it back to what the podcast is about, you talked about bad attitudes. Of course, we have 5 kids. All of them struggle with bad attitudes at times because we all struggle with bad attitudes at some time. And so how do we deal with this with our kids? And what should our posture be? Well, one posture should be that we should expect it, because we all struggle with this of when we are in a bad mood or when we're upset about something, how then do we respond? And so in some ways it shouldn't be like it shouldn't be surprising to us. We should expect it.
Okay.
And then it can be something that we relate with our kids on.
I don't relate with my kids that way. I've always got a good attitude.
Yeah. And then it can be that, which can help us to have a proper view of it. And then I think can help us, as we have this discussion today, of having a proper view of how we help them to handle that situation.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying? So it's not that it's just this thing like, we have to deal with this with our kids, as much as, yes, we do have to deal with it with our kids, but but it's something we can relate to. It's something that if we have the posture that we can actually help them in it. And it's not just like, oh, this kid is the worst.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it sounds like a lot of life in a fallen world.
Yeah.
In a fallen world where human beings have this tendency toward rebellion,
Yeah.
toward this inclination. There's a healthy expectation. And so, yeah, if your kids have attitude, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And
sorry. I'm just sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead. No,
interrupting,
interrupt me. I'm okay with that.
Well,
I'm secure.
I think because when it comes to what we're talking about today, talking back, dirty looks from kids, rolling eyes, attitude in general, we can take it really personally. And sometimes it's meant very personally. So I'm not naive. Okay. So, but this is where for me, it's helpful to remind myself of, this tendency we have as human beings. It's not that my kids are the worst kids that were ever born, or whatever. Maybe we've allowed some really bad habits. So we'll talk about that. But you know what I mean? I just like reminding myself of that perspective because it helps me not to take it so personally. And then it helps me to have a proper view of how to go forward.
Well, it sets expectations. Like there's a healthy expectation that our kids are going to be sinful.
Yeah.
That their human nature is fallen. Even if they're redeemed, they're still going to have those habits that they bring in to their Christian life. So there's a healthy expectation so that you're not devastated by this. You don't take it too personally, but and like I was saying with lots of life, there's that side of it, but then there's also the side that God's Holy Spirit is sanctifying us as well. And so God accepts us as we are, right? But he doesn't want to leave us where we are.
Yeah.
That's a great cliche right there. If you guys want to copy that, that's one of those like Christian cliches that's, really powerful.
You should write that down and quote yourself on social media.
Yes, I'm going to quote myself on social media.
That is my pet peeve when people quote
I'm going to have
themselves.
a picture of me on Instagram this week of like me in front of an audience speaking with that quote. And we're going to see if it goes viral.
Oh my gosh. Okay? I will mock you endlessly if you do that.
And if you do, again, I'll take that as you love me if you mock me.
So, okay. So yes, we're not supposed to stay there though. So when I say, it's something we all experience, everything I said, I'm not trying to belittle the issue because I actually think it's a really important that our kids' attitudes is something we should be addressing a lot with them. So I'm not trying to belittle it. I actually think this is a very, very important issue.
And why do you think it's an important issue, Erin? That's a key transition to right here on our notes, our show notes here. Why is this an important issue? It's a smooth transition.
Did you write that? Okay. Because a lot of things, but for one thing, you're helping. You're training your children how to treat other people. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about how we allow them to treat us, the attitude and mockery, disrespect, all those things that could be included in this are habits that they're forming and they're learning. Okay, I feel emotions. They're going to feel emotions. I'm feeling these emotions of feeling tired or angry or frustrated or sad. And so we teach them the appropriate way to respond to that. Either we teach them really bad habits in that we allow them just to respond. I'm not suggesting we've modeled everything that they do, but especially when kids are young, they don't know how to handle emotions they feel. And so they act. And then if we reinforce that or allow it or don't say anything, these are habits and that actually then, to my second point, affects their heart and affects the kind of people they become. And that's where I think for that point, we can go to the scriptures and get affirmation for that.
Yeah, I think there is a sense, kind of with the attitude stuff, that it's a little more, I don't know, a little more clear, or it's like, yeah, clearly there's a heart issue here when attitude is expressed. But in one sense, I think what we want to think, and what I think is true, is that every behavior, so whether it's a tantrum or whether it's direct disobedience or whether it's laziness, or, all of these things are matters of the heart. Mm-hmm. Attitude seems to be just a little more explicit expression of what's going on in the heart. It's like you see those rolling eyes, you see that look on their face, and it's almost like they just pulled their heart out and said, "Here, here's what's going on." And so in this, and I think in all of our correction as parents, mm-hmm. when we correct our kids' behavior and things, we want to think about what's going on in the heart. But I think sometimes we make this distinction almost too, what's the word I'm looking for? We separate kind of the heart and behavior too much. Oh, yeah. And as if, because I think there's some parents might be tempted to think, well, if I deal with the rolling of the eyes and the attitude and the whining or whatever it might be, I'm not getting to the heart issue. And we want to say, well, no, actually, by dealing with the behavior, you get to the heart.
Yeah, that's actually what I find in popular parenting advice. So, I like to look in the recent parenting magazines and just the stuff that's coming out, the current stuff. And what's common, I think, is this, just deal with the heart, and the way you deal with the heart is that you allow them to act however their heart is telling them to act. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this elevating of the heart. And of course, that's not a Christian worldview, because we know our tendency towards sin and rebellion. And
the heart is deceitful above all else, right? Jeremiah 17:9.
Oh, is it 17:9?
Yeah.
I was going to say 17:3. Good thing you said it.
Good thing you got a Bible scholar here.
So I think the popular trend today is they're feeling it in their heart, so let them express it. Yeah.
Like self-expression is the highest good for a kid.
But the way we train them to act can actually affect their heart for good. Yeah. And that's what the scriptures talk about. And I think we should just quickly go through some of these before we get to some practical, how do you handle it? Mm-hmm. Because I think the Bible helps us to understand this is one of the ways we can help to shape our children and train them towards virtue. Yeah. Okay, so you want me to go first?
Yep.
Okay, so Proverbs 4, which I'll start in 20. I know we had written 23, but actually the whole proverb, you could read the whole proverb, and after you listen to this podcast, you might want to just go read the whole of Proverbs 4. But in Proverbs 4:20, it says, "My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you." And it goes on, "Let your eyes look directly ahead, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil."
That passage directly deals with the rolling of the eyes.
Let your eyes
look directly ahead. When I'm talking to you, look into my eyes, right? That might be a misapplication of the passage, but
maybe.
What you see in that passage is it deals with behaviors, mm-hmm. but also talks about watching over the heart. And it's watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life, which Jesus, I think, addresses this and echoes this several places in Matthew, in the Gospels here. Matthew chapter 6:21, he's talking about treasures and not storing up treasures on earth, right? But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. But in 21, he says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And what you treasure is where your heart will be, and then that will impact and shape what you do, right? And so in this particular case, you're storing up, things, treasures here on earth. But the idea there is that your heart plays this central role
in how you act.
Yeah. And so then Matthew 12:34, Jesus says, and he talks 33, he's saying, make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. So again, the idea of the heart, which now I guess if we're going to define the heart in the New Testament, it's not merely like the seat of emotions in Jewish thought, and I think consistent with the scriptures understanding the heart, the mind, the will. This is referring to kind of the center of the person. And so it's not just when we talk about out of the heart flow your actions, meaning, well, out of your emotional state. It's the New Testament idea of heart is much deeper. It's like your inner person.
Your soul.
Yeah.
Is that how you would?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I would say those faculties of the soul maybe are what's being captured here. So maybe the affections, which would include desires and emotions, and the will or volition, and then the rational mind. So I think the key, though, that we just want to highlight is that there is an inner issue here that we want to address. And actually, by addressing the behavior, you are getting to that inner heart stuff. Because some people will say, hey, well, what we just said earlier, this is a heart issue. So if you address it, you're not really getting to the root of it. So just kind of let this out. And I want to say, no, I don't think that's a good idea, because by addressing the behavior, you are addressing the heart, which I think is consistent with the scriptures. You have God constantly giving us commands and addressing behavior and saying certain behaviors are wrong. Of course, Jesus addresses, right, the quote unquote righteousness of the Pharisees. That's not enough. There's deeper heart issues. His incredible teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, that it's not just the external appearance, it's what's going on underneath. And so it's kind of bringing that, these things together and giving us a fuller picture. Ralph Waldo Emerson has this quote that maybe you've heard before, but he says this. He says, sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. Which I think that quote really captures the idea that there's this dynamic interplay between our actions and our state of heart, if you will, that we can act in certain ways that condition our heart one way or the other, towards evil or towards good. And so we need to discipline ourselves. In fact, this is what Paul's talking about in 1 Timothy 4:7, where he says, discipline yourselves for the purpose of godliness. There's a disciplining that we can do, spiritual disciplines, learning to act in certain ways, acting in certain ways. It's like in a marriage relationship, if the feelings and the emotions aren't at some high, we don't say, oh, we'll just give in to that, or that's just fine where you're at. we know that we can act ourselves into ways of feeling, as well as we can feel our ways into acting. That was another good cliche. Write that down, people. Quote me on that.
Another quote for social media.
Christian cliches just come like this. No, but seriously, I think that fits with what Emerson's saying here. Sow a thought, you reap an action. And this is the idea of paying attention to our inner life, being very careful about what's going on. Watch over your heart, right? Because you sow a thought, you reap an action. There's this idea that what we think gets played out, right? You live at the mercy of your ideas. Yeah. So a thought, reap an action. So an act, reap a habit. So then this stuff can get habituated.
Yeah, and that's what Aristotle talked about, because he connected virtue with habit. And actually, he talked about it's the little habits that cultivate a virtuous man, human being. And it's in the little choices that we make. So it's the habit connected to virtue and character.
I think I want to highlight what you just said. It's the little things. And I think let's take that back to these attitudes. This is why it's so important for us
to
as
address
parents
the little things.
And adults who are discipling kids, address the little things like talking, what we would maybe consider talking back, or dirty looks, or rolling the eyes, or rudeness, or interrupting. Those aren't just little things.
Yeah.
And even if they are little things, we still want to address those little things before they become habituated, before they become big things, and have a way of shaping our kids and going in one direction. So, all right, how do we address this? What do we do when the kid gives you the rolling of the eyes?
Yeah.
What do you do, Mom?
I first want to say you don't ignore it, which is what you were just saying. I think that is sometimes a popular response, that you just ignore it. And I'm not saying we don't give grace, but ignoring it isn't giving grace. I think the first thing you do is you see it as a big deal and you address it. So
it's almost like you see it as a big deal because it's a little deal.
Because
that's what
small,
it's one of those small things.
Yes.
That is another cliche.
Oh my.
See it as a big deal because it's a little deal. That's why it's a big deal. Hopefully our cameraman,
your
Micah,
cliches are getting worse too as this podcast goes on.
Ouch, Erin. Ouch, that stings.
Okay, so address it. Don't let it go. And this is what we've done. And I mean saying, do not roll your eyes when I'm talking to you. Or what I've said.
Say that again. You kind of said that forcefully.
I've said to our kids of you watch your tone when you're talking to me. Things like that.
Do you always say it that calm?
Address it. Well, I thought I just said it mean. You just said I gave you chills because I said it mean. I say it sternly.
Yes, you
because do. I want to communicate a seriousness about it. And I don't want to be treated like that. So it's a big deal.
And it's not right for a kid to treat you that way.
Right. And so I think addressing it and bringing it up is the first thing. Don't just let it go.
Don't tolerate it.
And starting when they're young too.
I think some parents need that permission.
Yeah.
I want to say, like, hey, it's okay to address it. It's okay not to tolerate it. It's okay to not want your kid to treat you that way.
Yes.
Because you are an image bearer. As much as we talk about our kids being image bearers and therefore are worthy of dignity and respect, we are image bearers as well. And so what we're doing in this is helping them to treat others who are made in God's image with dignity and respect. So
connecting it to that bigger thing, I think, is important. And we have people in our lives that allow their kids to talk to them in a way that they don't allow anyone else to talk to them that way.
Okay, that's interesting. Just that thought of why do we let our kids address us that way, whereas we would not tolerate that with other people. And that might be something to think about as a parent. Like, why would that be the case? What might be underneath that? Is it that this is how your family, maybe your parents kind of interacted with you in your childhood, and so this is just something that's, perpetuated in your family? And to think about that. I think thinking about why you might allow that, why you might permit that, why you might tolerate that.
Yeah. And so letting them treat you in a way that you wouldn't let anyone else treat you. And also making the connection that the way you're letting them treat you is probably how they're going to treat everybody else. So like what you were saying, thinking about future relationships and just forming habit, all of those things that if we allow them to, in their bad moods, in their times where we have to say something hard to them and they don't like it, that they react, and they're just allowed to react and be rude and roll their eyes and be disrespectful and all those things. And
let me ask you this, because I think maybe some people might be wondering, well, at what age? Because when you think about attitude, often you think about kind of older kids, but there's whining that happens very early on, and there's complaining that seems to me grows into worse attitude as they get older if we tolerate that smaller, quote unquote, smaller stuff. So even with your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old, are you saying don't tolerate some of that whining, that complaining?
Yeah, that's why a lot of times, just last week, I was speaking with a group of young moms, and one of the things I tell them is not to let their little toddlers say no to them, and especially to yell no to them. Or to yell at them,
I thought you were saying especially yell at your kid when he says no to you.
Oh, sorry, no. Especially not to let them yell no, but the whole, no, mommy, no, that kind of.
Yeah.
This disrespect starts really little because, again, they're little human beings who have this tendency towards rebellion and have these emotions and don't know how to do it. And so they need our help on how do I be angry but not sin? How do I feel frustrated but not throw a fit on the floor? Well, this is something we have to teach them to do. So it starts very young. And so this is something, if you're listening and your 16-year-old is really disrespectful to you, it's harder to change a 16-year-old and how they treat you than compared to a 3 or 4-year-old.
Yeah, because we've allowed them to be habituated.
Yeah, and it's created
and that, I think that's important to think about.
But I think, yes. I think you're going to say more.
I was going to say more. If you want to agree with me, go ahead.
Well, I agree
now
with
I've got more. No, but that's where you want to start early. Now, again, if you're listening to this and you've got teenagers and you're like, yikes, we didn't deal with this early. That's fine. It's never too late.
There's still hope.
Yes. But if you have little ones, take this issue seriously up front, because you don't want them to get in habits of the heart and habits of action that will kind of let this thing foster.
Yeah.
So
I think, moving forward, we don't ignore it, we address it. And then I think, you give them an opportunity to respond, maybe apologize if they were rude.
Okay. I just want to get really practical here. I'm just thinking, let's deal with that 3-year-old. So your 3-year-old's whining. How do you address it? Walk us through this.
So, okay, you're talking about whining. So you tell them to stop. And then you tell them if they don't stop, there's going to be a consequence. Mm-hmm. And typically the consequence can be that they don't get what they're whining for. Yeah. And that's usually enough to get them to stop. But to have some kind of a consequence for, and fast forward to a 13-year-old who's rude, you say, don't talk to me like that. And not only will I not drive you where you're wanting me to drive you or allow you to do what you're wanting, there's going to be a serious consequence if you keep talking to me like that.
Okay, good. So first address it. Don't tolerate it. Definitely address it. And then offer a consequence.
A warning that there's going to be a consequence. Yeah. And I think for older kids, it's appropriate to say, to have that boundary of that an older kid can understand more than a younger kid, but just that you're not going to allow them to treat you that way. With a little kid, it's more, this isn't how we talk to each other.
Yeah. And let me say this, because I think this is one of the fruits we've seen with our own kids as we've addressed this stuff, because we've definitely addressed attitude with our kids.
Yeah.
And again, our kids have had plenty of attitude. We're not.
Yeah. That's why we've had lots of chances to address
We've had 5 kids to kind of mess up so that we can do this podcast. And you can learn from our mistakes. But no, one thing we've learned is that really, especially when you do this well with the older ones, or you're doing it, even if you're not necessarily doing it as well as you could, you're doing it with the older ones, it can create culture in your family where then that thing's not allowed. Because I guarantee you, if you let the young or the older ones give you attitude and the younger ones see it, guess what? That's going to create this culture where that is now permissible.
Yeah.
So
yes,
our older ones, as we've addressed that and dealt with that, and they've learned not to give attitude, then what we've seen is the younger ones, it's just come easy. It's not being modeled for them.
Yeah, which is our next thing we want to talk about is modeling. But you think about how the modeling of an older sibling, if an older sibling treats dad like dad's an idiot, then guess what me as the younger sibling's going to do? Treat dad like he's an idiot, because that's how you get your way, and there's no consequence. If I can yell and scream at mom and nothing happens, then mom can expect that however many more kids she has, this is how she's going to be treated. So thinking about modeling, now first, I think as we think about modeling, we have to spend a minute talking about how we model for our kids how to engage in conversation with others when we're upset. And that's
you're talking about
painful.
Like you and me?
Well, husband and wife, mom to grandma, ouch. Mom to kids.
To in-laws?
To in-law. This is just like, you can start to feel overwhelmed, like, oh, shoot. But yes.
Oh, shoot, I failed there. I fell in that relationship.
Well, I haven't personally, but.
Yeah, you're not speaking from experience whatsoever.
You are so rude. Okay,
no, I meant us.
Oh,
I meant
okay,
us.
sure.
That's exactly
so the modeling part, if you talk to your kids, screaming, yelling, you know what I'm saying?
Or you have attitude.
And
you roll your eyes.
Yeah, you roll your eyes at them. They will reciprocate.
Yeah.
And so that might be where we start of realizing we don't treat our kids well.
And if that's what you realize, then the appropriate response is to humble yourself and to confess that to your kids. I think it would be wonderful for you to go to your kids, for me to go to our kids, and to apologize, to say, I recognize that I have had a lot of attitude with you guys. I have done this or I have done that. And I want to grow. The Holy Spirit's working on me and sanctifying me as much as he is you. And I confess that. I apologize. I ask for forgiveness. That'd be the place to start if you recognize that. Yeah. And then begin to work on that, discipline yourself.
Yeah, I think especially if we know we grew up in a home where we learned this habit of exploding or being disrespectful, fill in the blank of how, then I think too, apologize to your kids, but also don't think that you don't need help. We need help to grow. Yeah. And so you might need to get some help in this area of learning how to treat people in a healthy way.
Well, this right here, our relationship, the relationship between a husband and wife, or a close friend or a family member who you're open to getting feedback from. This right here is one of the biggest ways I think the Holy Spirit works on me. And I think sometimes you like to think you're the Holy Spirit, but it's really him working through you, honey. But you will say to me, or you'll reflect back something to me that I just haven't recognized. Or I'll do the same thing with you where we can say, hey, when you were talking to, Micah, you seemed this way, or you were harsh, or, and that feedback is so good, especially when we're open to it. But we need that kind of feedback to make sure that we are not modeling what sinful behavior, sinful attitudes.
Yeah. And I think, of course, we could also get feedback if our kids are older. And that hurts the most, I think, for me, when the kids have said to me, Mom, why are you talking so irritated at me? And Mom, why are you so angry? That's when it really hurts. But we need that feedback too, because so then we can have the dialogue with them. You're right. I'm talking really irritated. I'm upset. But I shouldn't talk to you that way. And that is, I think, that even that modeling of letting them say something to us, and of course having them do it in a respectful way, but that will open up communication. So then if we say, hey, we want to grow in this as a family, because what we've recognized now is we don't treat each other in a healthy way.
Yeah. And this is where I think it's important. Obviously, there's a hierarchy here with parent having appropriate authority with their kid. But there is also a sense, and I think we need to view it this way, is that I'm actually a co-disciple with my kid in our relationship with Christ, meaning Christ is working on me just as he's working on you. And I have this special role to play, but also I'm humble enough to realize I've got a lot to do. And when we do that, that really can help set the tone and maybe do a reset. We in our families might need to do a reset on this because we've just given all this space for there to be all this attitude that's crept in, and it's parents to kids and kids to parents. And so there might be a resetting but the issue here is modeling how we talk to each other, how they see us talking to other people, how we talk to them. We obviously can't simply expect them not to give attitude when we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So we address it. We don't tolerate it. There's consequences. We need to model. And then I think with our older kids, there's some appropriate conversation about, okay, let's explore what's going on in your heart. Of course, you're not going to word it that way. I can imagine.
You could, but it would sound super
son,
cheesy.
I want to explore what's going on in your heart. But asking...
He'd be like, no.
Asking the question, like, why? Why did you roll your eyes? Why did you get so irritated and have so much attitude with me? What was going on? And those are the appropriate kind of conversations when they get to maybe the tween years, the teen years. And I think maybe going back, if you go back to our discipline talk, looking at the different stages of kind of moral development, those conversations are good to have, to try and probe and dig down a little bit harder and just asking, okay, what was it that you were feeling? Why were you feeling that way? And see if we can't do a little more excavation to what's deeper underneath just the rolling of the eyes or the attitude.
Yeah. And I think if you can start this when they're young, it's so beneficial for those years.
Are you starting the conversations?
Addressing it, and so to help these conversations, I'm just thinking that the younger you can start. I just want
to clarify, like for the 3-year-old, we wouldn't have that conversation.
No, you can't. Their conversations are very short,
and concrete.
Yes.
This is a little more abstract.
This is where if you lay the foundation of how we act and respect each other, because you can't have conversations without at least a little semblance of respect for each other. And so starting when they're young, to not allow them to, something I see a lot is, kids get upset about something and they take it out on mom and dad.
Yeah.
And of course we do this as husband and wife. We
Yes,
take out
you do.
our emotions sometimes about other things on each other. And so that's probably where we'll end, of just talking about the benefit of addressing attitude. Not only will help to bring peace and harmony to your home and set a high bar of how we treat each other, but it affects their future relationships. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier before, but just having the perspective that you are preparing your children for a lifetime of relationships. And we want our kids to have friends. We want our kids, if God so wills it, that they will get married one day. Some of our kids will stay single, and that's wonderful. But of course, the majority of people get married. So one really, really good way to prepare our kids for marriage is to teach them to control their attitude, to control the dirty looks, to control their tongue. Because of course, in marriage, when it gets heated, you have the desire to say things that are on your heart sometimes that you should not say. You need to control your tongue. So having just that view that you're helping to prepare them for life. Yeah. And it's not just about your relationship. It's not less than that, though, because also you're preparing for a lifetime of relationship with them too. Yeah. And that's important. But it's all their relationships.
Yeah. And I think, I think we made it through this entire podcast without you personally rolling your eyes at me once. You just did it. We failed. Gosh. We're going to have to redo this podcast. By addressing this.
Rolling the eyes. I'm just thinking. Not too long ago, one of the girls rolled their eyes at you. You were saying something silly or whatever. And I jokingly said, "Don't roll your eyes at your father." And she said, "You do that all the time." But rolling of eyes is a joke.
Yeah, don't reveal our imperfections here. No, I think we want to address this stuff with our kids because it has such an impact on future relationships and future marriages and future children and future generations. Mm-hmm. And so dealing with the attitude, dealing with what's going on in the heart is an absolutely critical thing to do at the earliest of ages because it will help shape their character. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.